As we quietly and meditatively prepare for this night, we are going to play our last prelude piece, which was recorded this week in Berlin as a prayer for Ukraine.
Now, the emphasis of Lent is always life lived for Christ. In the past, I have sometimes wondered whether some individuals did not live Lent in order to practice a physical fast. Or again, if it wasn't some kind of religious ritual that they experienced rather than a rededication. And so, as we examine our former attitudes and practices in Lent, we come to the conclusion that this Lent can be better if we have greater depth in our approach. And if we do see it as a spiritual quest, a quest that begins as soon as we awaken in the morning and remains with us all through the night. Out of a Lent well lived will come a definite influence for the enrichment of our entire incarnation, and this is worth every effort we can make. Now, we shall endeavor to make of this spiritual adventure a time that is not one-sided, but rounded, that will include many things. For one thing, there are the negatives to be considered, and we'll take them up first. It is a time for self-denial concerning negativities, such as fear, dread, a lack of self-giving. It is a time for the practice of positive values. And on the physical plane, of course, it is a very good period for physical cleansing. On emotional level, that cleansing goes on as we examine our feelings and keep turning them as we would a telescope until we have the feeling and the vision right in our focus toward God. On the mental plane, this is a time for placing our mind under the control of our souls. The mind is very capable, but it has its limitations. And therefore, it should be taught during Lent especially to forego all pride of intellect, all confidence in its powers as being very great, and through our divine satisfaction with ourselves, as we are incomplete and unfinished, we should reach toward that divine part of us which has never left the kingdom, that wants so much to overshadow us and use us.
Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our second Lent Wednesday services. And glad to see everyone here and our online community as well. Thank you. So it's been 1 week, and are you feeling the effects and the hope and the promise of Lent? Probably are feeling challenged, which is a good thing. But also, hopefully you're feeling and realizing great opportunities and potentials that are really before us during these 46 days and any other time in the year. And the watchwords for Lent, Flower shares with us, are resurrection, self-conquest, and joyous victory. Resurrection in a sense of dying to our old ways of being in our selfishness and self-centeredness and human nature, to be reborn into the ways of light and the self-conquest by our soul, stretching ourselves to live within our soul, to be more of what the Christ sees in us, leading to that joyous victory to share in his triumph, because we are all destined for our own individual Easter at some point. And we have here on the altar a chalice, and also in the cloth behind the Christ statue, a representation of a gold chalice. And the chalice being the Holy Grail, the Christ ideal, the Christ archetype that his great attainment has impressed within our soul. That is what inspires and empowers us, because we see what is possible. He has shown us the way toward completeness and to wholeness, toward that divine conscious union and oneness with God. So Lent then becomes a wondrous adventure for us to live for Christ, as Flower just shared with us, to surrender our lower tendencies, to again stretch ourselves into those ways of light. At the heart of all creation lies the Christ's urge of return, the search for and recovery of this oneness with God, So let us all respond to his call in our own ways to make this Lent the most meaningful and beautiful in our life to date. And as Flowers told us, this path we consciously travel from creation to resurrection passes through the large country of discipleship. And in this region of development, a Redeemer is necessary. The Christ is our transformer and evolver. He is the quickening potency that we require to complete our journey. To share in these purposeful steps of this sacred journey Godward, our theme for Lent this year is life lessons coming in step with Christ. To walk with the Christ, to love with his heart, to think and imagine and create with his mind, and to serve and do good through his living Spirit through us. Tonight we'll hear from Deborah Waitley, who's a PhD psychologist, and her topic is coming in step with humility. And humility, of course, being one of the most primary requisites for us to free ourselves of the past, of our lower nature, to be self-emptied and God-infilled. And we look forward to hearing from Deborah on this topic. But first, let us attune ourselves to receive the benedictions of truth and light and of God's graces. And as we close our eyes, let us use for our watchword, "Arise in me, O Christ, illumine my soul." Arise in me, O Christ, illumine my soul. Heavenly Father, Mother God, who is the eternal sun ever shining within us and throughout all life and creation. Lord Emmanuel, the living Christ, our way-shower, the divine pattern of our own becoming. Divine Spirit of truth and wisdom, who enables our enlightened progress. Spirit of grace and mercy, who bestows the graces of God's infinite mercy. The hierarchy of perfected, pure souls, made perfect in God, the glorious kingdom of the shining ones. To the Spirit of God that indwells us, to God the whole, of which we are eternally connected. We lift our hearts in gratitude for this wondrous opportunity of Lent, where we can focus our energies and full attention on the spiritual purpose of life and strive wholeheartedly to prove that we are God's and that we desire to be nearer to the light, nearer to the Christ. Enable all who love thee to shine thy light, thy perfect love into the world, to bless every expression of life from the youngest to the most advanced. May the Prince of Peace, who governs all life, enable the transcendence of all aggression, of all conflicts, of all violence and cruelties. For we trust These are only temporary. That you will enable great good to come of the challenges we face. And that goodness and peace will triumph, as ultimately it always has. Help us to do our part, to give as we can, to hold all others in goodwill and in the consciousness of love. May there be an end to the conflict in Ukraine. Bless every refugee, every person displaced. That help will reach those most in need. May those who are aligned with the forces of light come together and do whatever's needed to awaken our world to what life can be. Guide every person who is trying to make Lent meaningful, that they will be fulfilled in ever greater growth and wondrous experiences of deep value. And bless us in our service tonight, our speaker, to receive the empowerments, the divine blessings from on high that are always there to help us, to encourage us, to inspire and empower us, to live from our soul, to do good, and to bring about a more peaceful world. We ask these things in Christ's most holy name. So let it be. Amen.
Good evening, everyone, and as always, I am so honored to be here tonight. And I'll have to be perfectly honest, I'm very humbled as well to be speaking on, of all subjects, humility. So it's probably one of the most humbling moments of my life to be in front of you on this topic, because what do I know of humility? And after all, it was just a year and a half ago that I was just a retreatant visitor here at Quest Haven. And I remember walking by this church and wondering to myself, who are those special beings that go there and that live on these grounds? They must be so sacred. And I felt a trepidation to go inside. I felt that it was so sacred that I wasn't ready to go inside the church. So again, what do I know about humility? I know it is so immense that I've always thought of it as something that only Christ or the saints or masters had it. and it was something probably impossible for me to really get in touch with. I was telling Blake yesterday, Blake, I really feel so overwhelmed about doing this talk. I am so not ready. I actually need a whole lifetime to prepare, and probably I'll get another lifetime to prepare, and I still won't think I'm ready, because humility is one of those things that is ongoing, that we keep on learning. And ever since last Wednesday night, when we were anointed with that special oil by Reverend Hal Lingerman, and he talked about us recommitting ourselves to Christ, to bring Christ in us and through us and out into the world. I'll have to tell you, I have been inundated with all kinds of tests and challenges and situations that have put me smack against humility's opposites. So pride, that overall patriarch of the, shall I say, dysfunctional family of characteristics, traits that are opposite of humility, which would include arrogance and ego and self-centeredness, conceit, vanity, all those traits. And isn't it interesting? Because I thought, okay, I'll approach humility with trying to define it. Maybe I can get a better idea of what it really is, so I can better communicate it. And what I found was, and it's quite interesting, if you were to do a word association test with people and ask them, spur of the moment, quickly, if I say the word humility, tell me the first word that comes to your mind. So you might be thinking right now, you can think to yourself. More often than not, many people will say pride with humility. They will put its opposite. And Reverend Hal talked about opposites last week. It's this interesting phenomenon because it's the same way when you say life, people will say death. You say love, people will say hate. So you wouldn't think so, but I think what it is in society, we're becoming more and more disconnected from those immense, vast, beautiful traits of humility and love. And we're being inundated ourselves in our lives with their opposites. And so those become very comfortable for us. So in a way, humility might be easier to define by what it's not. And those words I just mentioned are what it's not. So what is it? So it's common for us to think of humility as being humble, and other synonyms are meekness, even weakness. But I wanted to look up, what's the origin of humility? If I go deep, what does it really mean? And it comes from Latin humilitas, which is insignificance, unimportance, degradation, debasement, humiliation. Well, it's no wonder we don't want to associate ourselves with humility. I mean, who wants to have all those traits? So I dug deeper. Okay, there's another Latin origin that's humilis, and that is base and humble. Okay, so I thought we're getting somewhere. That's starting to feel a little more comfortable for me. And then I found the origin of the origin for humility, and it is earth, soil, and ground. And that felt good because I thought about this fertile soil that we all are on, that we're born onto earth. And maybe we have to allow ourselves to fall to the ground when encountering the self, and then bring in humility through our falls. Then when I heard Reverend Julie Holt this past Sunday, what really resonated with me when she said, places become sacred because of the stories they hold. And I know here at Quest Haven, the ground is very sacred. And it made me realize that within each of us, we have our own story. So as we walk the path, our path towards God, towards Christhood, each of us can make the ground holy, can make our ground holy through the stories that we hold, through the stories that we tell, as long as we have the awareness that it is holy because of the holiness that is inherent in our own being. We just have to have the right ears to hear it, the right eyes to see it, and of course, the heart, the purest heart to open to it through the light of Christ. So I want to repeat, I'm honored and very humble and also feeling a little vulnerable because I'm going to share a story with you that was very life-changing for me as far as to help me make that shift from pride to humility. And my story begins, I'll give you a little background. So it started 17 years ago when my stepfather of 32 years was dying. He had a very aggressive form of cancer, and he was my stepfather for 32 years. I was very close to him. And it was a tremendous time of grief for our family. We just didn't know how to handle it. It was the first time for me that someone close to me was passing away, was dying. And so I made a vow during that time to God, consciously, that someday before I die, I am going to do hospice work, because the hospice volunteers and staff that came to help our family get through that time was so monumentally healing for us. And I am so forever grateful for the work they did. And I vowed I want to do that someday for other families and patients for what they provided for us. So I, 4 years ago, went through hospice training. I decided it was time to do it. And I signed up for a training with Sharp Hospital in their hospice volunteer program. And just to give you some color of what a contrast that decision was for me, is I had been a Fortune 500 corporate consultant for 20 plus years. And so making this shift was really different. And I had a lot of friends and colleagues and associates that would say, why do you want to do that? That's interesting. And so there was a little bit of, I don't know, shaming, I guess, for making that decision. But I received so much self-fulfillment and was so rewarded with that work. And I also got a lot of praise from people, a lot of kudos, obviously, from the families and patients, and was told things like, oh, this is such admirable work you do, and it's so selfless, and you're just an angel. So it started to feel really good. And so in my kind of corporate climbing mode, I wanted more. So I wanted to go to the next level. So I decided to train in 11th hour hospice work, training, volunteer training work, which means that you're assigned to a patient when they have 3 days or less to live. Regular hospice, it's 6 months or less to live, and then the 11th hour is 3 days or less. So I was called to sit with a patient this one time. His name, I'll call him Jerry, so his wife could get a break from taking care of him because she was obviously overwhelmed. And so this wasn't an 11-hour visit yet, but it was just a one-time visit, and Jerry was pretty coherent, so we had good rapport, and he was pretty awake, and he was my age, and I could tell he had, in the prime of his life, been such a energetic and virile man, just so much goodness in him and energy. And I also could tell that he felt embarrassed in front of me to be in this condition, and it was kind of hard to see him, and he tried so hard to, impress me and to be strong. But we had a really good bonding visit, and I also developed a really good relationship with his wife while I was there. So a week later, I got a call from his wife, and he had deteriorated to the point where he was now in 11th hour. He needed 11th hour care. So she was pleading with me, sobbing hysterically on the phone, saying, Deborah, please can you come? We need you so badly. I need you here. We've got family that has flown in from all over the country, and we've got his best friends, and we're gathered here, and if you could get here as soon as possible, we really could use your support. The chaplain is on his way, so they're going to be giving him his last rites, and if you could get here as soon as possible, all of us could really use your presence. So I felt so honored and also really excited with the anticipation of getting to be there. So I actually put on a new sweater. I wanted to look nice for the family. I got in my car. It was about a 20-minute drive, and I started pre-playing this experience in my mind of what it was going to be like. And I started feeding myself with all these positive expectations for what I was going to do there, what my role was. I was feeling so special. The wife had called me of all the other volunteers she could have called, and she wanted me there. They needed me. I would walk in, and they would welcome me, and I would have so many people to comfort, not just the patient and the wife, but the whole family. I would feel needed. It was so honoring. And I would also have the opportunity to experience, for my first time, a chaplain whose role it was to offer spiritual condolences and help the patient pass on to the next life, and learn from that, and it just felt like a tremendous opportunity. I just felt so good, so good. So I got there and walked into the room. It was the entire living room of their house was dimly lit, and it was very sombering. So the family and friends had gathered bedside around Jerry, and there were a lot of tears, and it was clearly a really, really sad time. But I was so welcomed. As soon as the wife opened the door and greeted me, she said, "Deborah, oh, thank God you're here. We've been waiting for you." And she led me into the room with all the family and friends, and she said, "Everybody, this is Deborah. She's the one I told you about, and she's here to be with us." And felt great. So she then said, "So everybody, let's get up and let's move into the other room." And so they started getting up and moving over to the family room out of the living room. And then she turned to me and said, "So Deborah, the wipes are here, diapers are there, I've got bed sheets for you, linens, I've got a basin of water and lots of towels, so could you please do this for me? You do this, right?" And I said, in that moment of, wow, this is not what I was expecting, but I said, absolutely, I do. So I kind of just sucked in that pride very quickly, and fortunately, the grandson had offered to help me. This was the first time I had performed this particular duty, and it turned into this incredible experience. I needed his grandson to help me move Jerry, and he was very soiled, but he needed to be cleaned and made ready for the chaplain's arrival and everybody to go through the ceremony. So it was tough. It took about 15, 20 minutes, and I slowed down. It felt like an hour, and I just surrendered into that task and very gently cleaned every inch of his body and honored him as I did so, thought about his life, remembered the conversation we'd had just the week before and how alive he was back then. And it even entered my mind that, and I said, "Jerry, I'm so sorry, I apologize," because I thought, gosh, he might be really embarrassed that this woman that he met last week was doing this now for him when he was unconscious and on his way out. But you know what? I felt that there was a bond there, a communion, and it just felt special, and I knew he would understand in some way. And I also felt that I was doing this for his wife, too, because I was helping her with her dignity, not only Jerry and his, but the wife clearly didn't want this to be her last moments, how she would spend with her husband. So I felt honored in some way to do this for her. So by this time, I finished. When it was over, the family and friends came back into the room, and I let go of all and any of my expectations that I could stay for the vigil service. The chaplain had arrived, and I took my cue at this point that it was time for me to leave. I had done what I came here to do. So I got in my car, and needless to say, the drive home was completely different than the drive there. I was enveloped in complete silence. It was as if my body had just been cleansed, every inch of it. I had been honored somehow in my honoring. And all I could feel was this silence, this presence of some being witnessing my transformation, the transmutation I had been through, because there was no sign of any of that hyperactive chit-chatting away of, oh, Deborah, you're so great. This is going to be such a great experience. That was gone. And what was left was emptiness, silence, and a profound humility. So it took me a few days to absorb what this meant, what this experience had been all about. And I realized in those days after that I was contemplating it that this is what I was called to do. It wasn't to just come in and be Miss, make everybody feel good about themselves. It was to perform a very special task that was important, but I was called to do it. Was part of the hospice work that I was called to do. And I realized it was about my surrendering all my expectations. It was a self-emptying of any ego or self-importance or what my role was going to be, and turning myself over to Christ. So I also thought it took me a few days to remember that Christ had washed his disciples' feet at the Last Supper, and I had completely forgotten about that. And I remembered that significant act of Christ, that exampleship of sheer humility and serving others, and not thinking that he was better than anyone else. He was here to serve them. And so the message for me was the same, even though it would have been nicer to clean feet, but still, the message was the same. I'm called to do this in serving the Christ. So I realized then that this was very sacred ground that I had just experienced, and that as we bring Christ in to us and through us and out into the world, that we're creating new sacred ground. And I felt because of that turning, I know Lent is about letting go of that which doesn't serve us and letting go of the ego and negative traits and emptying ourselves of that which doesn't serve us or doesn't serve Christ in our Godward journey, and filling ourselves with God, with God's presence, a Christing. So I then wanted to, knowing I was going to be speaking to you on humility and thinking about this experience, I wanted to further go into it and explore humility to a much deeper level. So I went back to, of course, Flower, who has so many wonderful quotes on humility, and she said, I found one, it was what she said about Thomas Merton, as you all know, is a Trappist monk, mystic, poet, and theologian. And she said this in her talk, Added Insights into Christian Mysticism, 1962. She said, I have seen no one who wrote as knowingly about humility as this man. So I thought this was someone I really needed to read. And one quote that he had, he said, in humility is the greatest freedom. Humility contains itself the answer to all the great problems in human life. It is the only key to faith with which the spiritual life begins. In perfect humility, all selfishness disappears, and your soul no longer lives for itself or in itself, but in God. And I really felt after this experience that I had kind of turned a corner. I wasn't the same self I was before. I had experienced this cloak of humility that was laid upon me. And in some ways, I've never been the same since that. And I do view life quite a bit differently. And it was from that turning away from that old self. I also notice now that I'm better able to detect when I'm entering that unsacred ground of pride and arrogance and conceit and ego, because I start to feel bad. I feel like there's this unease or dis-ease that's coming over me, and it's a kind of a great trigger to then turn toward Christ and bring him in and bring that spirit in and self-empty all of that. There's another quote that I really like that resonated with me, and it's from, believe it or not, Paramahansa Yogananda, the Indian monk who founded the Self-Realization Center just down the road. And around the time that Flower came to Quest Haven, I think a little bit before. And this quote came in some readings I did on the second coming of Christ, the resurrection of the Christ within you. And he said, "Humility is the natural expression of every soul who knows God." And I thought, wow, it's the natural expression. So it's something that could be innate in us that we know. But it can come, there's a potential that it can come from every soul when you know God. And of course, that made me think of Flower. And it made me think of why we're all here. It made me think of why I wanted to come here and study in the academy and with the masters and the ministers here and all of you. And because Flower to me is the epitome of someone who knew God and who knows the way to know God. And some of her quotes were, "When we are purified and our whole attention is riveted upon God, then as we look at anything, we see God shining through, whether it is a man, woman, or a blade of grass." And I really love that. And these were some quotes she wrote in Volume 1 of Christian Mysticism. And another thing she said, "Not just believing in God, the mystic knows God, desires direct experience, not through any power of our own, but because we go with a hunger in our hearts to every prayer. Before every experience, we realize a need for God, and then we welcome, we wait, and at last we find infilling." So that was so powerful to me, because I know that in order to be in humility and know what humility really is, when we know God, it becomes a natural expression for us. It's somehow a more direct pathway to humility, and it's a foundation for the Christing, to know Christ and God. Another thing Flower said, "We are interested in primarily one thing, in loving God so completely, so wholeheartedly, so beyond anything else, that a direct first-hand contact is made with the divine spirit of the ever-present God." So there are so many more quotes and messages from Flower and so many other great people that have spoken of humility. And for me, what this whole experience has taught me, and not just my hospice transformational experience, just coming to Quest Haven and being here in the last year and a half, going through the special ceremonies and services we have here, even walking on the grounds here, I have learned so much about humility that I never would have learned otherwise. And when I think of Flower's my favorite quote, and it's her theme, really, about self-emptying and being God-filled. And I realize that when we're in humility, we're bowing to that something greater than ourselves. We are in reverence and respect and surrender to something greater than ourselves, which is God and Christ. And I think now that when I approach a situation that challenges me, or I deviate or get distracted, or I forget where my true purpose lies and then get into the worldly things and fall prey to arrogance and conceit and ego and all those things of the personality self. Now I think of doing a ritual, and in my bowing, and maybe wherever I am I don't always bend my head, but I visualize bowing my head and emptying all that stuff out of my mind, all that stuff that just gets in the way of God, of Christ, and of knowing Christ and knowing God, and therefore knowing who I really am, from knowing who we really are. It can be as easy as bowing, that surrender. And it sounds so easy, right? But I think as a practice, it can be so profound. And then what happens in that profound surrender and that bowing, and if I just clear my mind out and empty it, of course I need to fill it with the right things. It can't just be, okay, I'm just going to be empty now, because as soon as I empty, there's going to be something else in the world that tries to fill it right up. Ego's going to come in. What are you doing? You're so lazy. You should be like accomplishing something, achieving something. And then before I know it, I'm just gone in that personality self of forgetting the foundation of humility and God and Christ. So besides the bowing, there's also, I think about that sacred ground that's here, that's everywhere, that we choose to find it and create it for ourselves. And so it's a kneeling as well. So it's no matter how many times we fall, and we're going to fall a lot. You know, I've fallen so many times in life, and I know I'm going to continue to fall, probably daily. But if I fall, it's going to take me to the ground. And in that ground, I can find that fertile soil, that transmuting soil that we need to live, that nourishes the whole planet, that nourishes us, that nourishes all life forms. And Christ can bring us to the ground. And then we can rise to meet him in his light. So subsequently, I have some new words for humility that are a heck of a lot better than the ones I started with on this journey. So I'd like to ask you, what in your life has caused you to feel that shift for yourself, like to encounter a situation where you were suddenly exposed, like you became naked or vulnerable when you realized, I've just gone off on this person I don't even know who is, and this conceit and pride. And so think about what has brought you to your knees. What brings you to your knees? What do you bow to? And what's going to help you come back to that earth of humility and find that foundation that we all need in order to walk this path? And I am so glad that we're walking this together. I mean, having this life lesson, stepping into the pathway of Christ, stepping into the path with Christ is so tremendous. And we can create our stories as we walk this path. And so the new words I have for humility also, besides vulnerability, which there's nothing wrong with that, again, as Thomas Merton and Flower is saying, it's freeing. It's a foundation. So it's a willingness to be vulnerable, to be transparent, honest, and profound surrendering, a willingness to surrender. And sheer gratitude, because when you're in gratitude, as you know, it's really hard to let all that negative stuff come in if you're constantly thanking the Lord and Christ for everything that we have. So then, as Flower often uses as other words for humility or with humility, is love And I just think of the profound love that Christ has for us and that he tells us to have for each other. And also a deep reverence. To me, this is probably one of the most powerful words or themes that I could tie in with humility, because it can take us beyond just who we are as human beings and open us up to all the life forms and bow to them and kneel to them as well. And so now in the morning, sometimes I'll wake up and I'll go outside and I will honor the life of the crickets, the honeybees, the birds, the trees, and even the earthworms in the ground that I walk on, because I am so humbled when I realize what they are doing for life on this planet, and am I doing as much as them in a day? So I encourage you all to think about what are some ways that we can come to humility through those back doors of humility's opposites. So we'll have a chance to explore that together in just a few minutes. Thank you so much for being here.
Who am I that the Lord of all the earth would care to know my name, would care to feel my hurt? Who am I that the bright and morning star would choose to light the way of my ever wandering heart? Not because of who I am, but because of what you've done. Not because of what I've done, but because of who you are. I am a flower quickly fading, here today and gone tomorrow, a wave tossed in the ocean, a vapor in the wind. Still you hear me when I'm calling. Lord, you catch me when I'm falling, and you told me who I am. I'm yours, I'm yours. Who am I that the eyes that see my sin would look on me with love and watch me rise again? Who am I that the voice that calmed the sea would call out through the rain and calm the storm in me? Not because of who I am, but because of what you've done. Not because of what I've done, but because of who you are. I am flower quickly fading, here today and gone tomorrow, a wave tossed in the ocean, a vapor in the wind. Still you hear me when I'm calling. Lord, you catch me when I'm falling, and you told me who I am. I am a flower quickly fading, here today and gone tomorrow, a wave tossed in the ocean, a vapor in the wind. Still you hear me when I'm calling. Lord, you catch me when I'm falling. for I am yours. I'm yours.
So we're going to do a little exercise to have you look at the back of your programs. There is a list, and it's an exercise on humility versus pride. So you have an opportunity right now to go through this and look at each one and determine where are you feeling a little pride. Where's that showing up in your life and how? What is keeping you from experiencing your humility? So as you go through these, there might be some that you feel don't apply to you at all, or some that really do. So just very quickly go through and just rate them on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being I have this all the way up to here. The first one's I want to impress people. So I'm a 10. If you have a 1, that means maybe it's just a little residual. You're not feeling it that much. So take a little time just to do that. We don't have much time, I apologize, for you to go through this. And if you have any questions, raise your hand because I can clarify some of these for you. For instance, the first one, I want to impress people. This is with accomplishments or your material possessions or maybe even how spiritual you are, your physical appearance or what you know. So there's deeper ways to explore these. And after you go through this list, you'll have some time to contemplate how you are going to pick one that you really want to focus on for the next week to work on, to find your way to that humility. So as you're going through these, I'm just going to run through the list for the people that are online and don't have an opportunity to see what you're filling out. So 1 is I want to impress people. Number 2, I desire recognition and praise. I like when people see what I do, and often when they don't, I don't feel good about it. I want to receive credit. Number 3, I live by my own will and self-sufficiency. In other words, I think I have enough strength and ability and wisdom to manage my life. I don't like to ask God or anyone for help. Number 4, I let worldly fears rule my life. So I tend to place more importance on what's going on in the world than with God, for instance, and I might seek approval from the world instead of God. Number 5, I compare myself to others. So it's you're somewhat performance-oriented, and you feel greater worth when you do well. 6, I'm a perfectionist and self-critical. So you don't like to be wrong because you feel it reflects poorly on you in others' eyes. Number 7, I think highly of myself. So this usually is in relation to others. You feel that you're more gifted, or you think that you have more to offer than others do. And you may not consider yourself average or ordinary. Number 8, I feel self-deserving. So you feel that you deserve everything that you have, and sometimes you might think that you deserve even more than that. Number 9, I am a captive of self-pity. This, you can become preoccupied with self-pity, or you can get into a victim consciousness mode. You can be consumed by how others treat you and feel that you're treated unfairly much of the time. Number 10, I love to reveal my mind. This is someone that likes to show off, so you may feel that you can't wait to express your opinions and answers when people are talking, and you feel compelled to jump in and balance the conversation with what you know. Number 11, I like people to know that I know. So you feel compelled to stop people when they start talking when you already know something, so you don't give them a chance to finish. That's another one. And then number 12, I am interruptive. You often interrupt people. You don't let them finish what they're saying, and maybe you're just not even listening to them because you can't wait to say what you want to say. So I just thought we'd go through those. And
I think now if everybody just looks over that list, Deborah, I think it would be good to find one that you want to tweak this week and improve. I think you were telling me, Deborah, that when you're reading from Dad, that he said humility is not something you can actually tackle. It's not a goal you go for. But each one of these, I think, represents a step that can be tweaked to make that possible. And if everybody picks one, and for example, how do I impress? I learned very quickly as being a principal and teacher, when you're working with individuals, to not put things in first person. Hey, I did this great as a teacher, you try it. It was about making it third person. I knew a teacher once, and so one of the things I was thinking about myself is instead of wanting to put myself in a position where, boy, don't everybody like to hear what I've done, I can always, if I want to share something that's been valuable in my life, to do it in third person. I knew someone once who did this, so that I'm, in a sense, I'm not, the human part of me is not getting that credit, but the God. And if we take one of these traits and find a technique to do that while the music finish, I think that would be a lovely thing to then take to our practice this week. What do you think?
I think it's a great idea. So, right, as Blake said, it's more than just what am I going to work on this week, but if you could just write down a few words of how you might approach that based on things like self-emptying and God-filling. What am I going to replace this with? Because these are things you're letting go, and then you're going to, what are you going to do to counter this? So what I would encourage you to do is this week, take what you've written and contemplate it some more, and maybe talk about it with family members or people you're close to, and have a discussion about, share with each other what you've identified, and maybe get some input and feedback, and it's something that you can work on with others in your home and in your community. It might be nice to share with each other.
Thank you so much, Deborah. We now Dan is going to give us our closing prayer and benediction, and we can take these seed beds into our night.
Thank you so much, Deborah. What a really beautiful story. Certainly made an impact with me. Thank you for being brave enough to share it. Well, next Wednesday, we continue with Coming in Step with Caring, and that will be from our Liz Lang. We look forward to that, 7:30 here in the Church of Holy Quest. And this Sunday, Reverend Blake Isaac will be talking on walking through the wilderness. So we look forward to that, and so you are not late. Please don't forget to set your clock ahead this Saturday night, or you'll be coming here at 11:45. O wondrous Lord Emmanuel, be with each and every one of us this week and the coming weeks to come, each and every day and in every moment, that we may glean from our understanding of who you are, of our deepening and ever-expansive relationship and connectedness with you, to live the full intent of Lent, to practice humility, to know that every good comes from thee, every ability, every opportunity, and every attainment is because thou art, and we are one with you. May it be a glorious week leading to a most glorious Easter experience for one and all. In Christ's name, amen.
Now we must learn to lose ourselves in the Christ nature. We must learn to reveal his Spirit. We would fail others if we depended on our personal selves to help them. But if we stand quietly and say, "Oh Lord, this need of the person is so great. Oh, help me to say the right word, to have the prayer which lifts, to do that which will take away the sting and the sadness." If we do that with our whole natures, help comes, light comes, and we are not self-rooted. We are light-giving. And so out of all of our days of Lent comes the adventure, the spiritual adventure a pilgrim knows as he journeys toward the courts of Christ. And so we say with all our hearts, a good and a high adventurous Lent to you this year.